Hey everybody, welcome back to the Unreal Engine live stream. I'm your host, Alexander Pascal, but today, the man of the hour is
up,
Andrew
guys?
Hurley. So we're going to be talking about foliage and landscape materials. So the first things first, we're just going to have to jump right onto the main screen and jump right in there and start showing what's up.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Alex. Hey again, everybody. It's nice to be back. I'm not as nervous as I was the first time, but still have some butterflies. So I'll, much like last stream, we have a lot to cover, a lot of content. This is going to be more of a high-level intro. We're not going to get super granular, but I'm going to show you sort of what foliage is, give you the general overview, and the different ways to apply it. And it's all based on the type of project you're creating, what your end result, how you want it to be, how much control you want to have over your scene. So with that said, since we have a lot to go over, let's just jump right into it. So to start, we'll just define what is foliage. And I have a little outline here that I'm actually gonna share this with you guys too. It's just something very simple I wrote up last night, just to kind of so you guys can follow along once you replay this and rewatch through it. So basically, foliage is it can almost be any static mesh. It can be that you paint on landscapes. You can paint on BSPs. You can paint on other static meshes, and those are all toggleable within the foliage foliage mode. But in a technical definition, foliage are automatically grouped together in batches. So these are instance meshes, which are grouped together in batches when you paint by way of hardware instancing, and it allows you to use a huge number of foliage instances with only a single draw call.
Exactly.
So that's the whole benefit of using foliage is really getting a lot of dense foliage in there without it affecting your performance, versus if it was the same amount and it was all static meshes that you dragged in there.
Yeah, because then it's the difference between one big beautiful draw call and a bunch of individual draw
Exactly,
calls.
which, as you know, will affect performance down the road. So with that said, we'll go into one single foliage mesh, and we'll look at basically the first thing that I actually looked at when I got into Unreal Engine and started messing around with foliage. We introduced the foliage lighting, and as you can see, before I get into this, I'd like to say that last stream I did, I made the project available. You guys had this. This project is using some stuff I've personally bought from the marketplace, some content from the marketplace. Yep. And as I go through that, I'll give those guys a quick shout out, because the stuff I'm using is I really like the quality of it and the customization of it. So
yeah, that's the only reason we won't be giving this one out. I know I normally say yes, it'll be up on the forum post, but yeah, this one includes a couple of assets that were purchased.
Yeah, but feel free to purchase them as well. I will not steer you away from that at all.
What's the team? Or what's the pack?
Here, let's see. Here, let's do this. Because it's all laid out right here. So I'm using starter content in this first map, but so the Realistic Trees pack, Realistic Trees 1,
really good pack.
The Ultra Dynamic Sky, and then we have the just the Grass pack. And I think the guy who makes Realistic Trees and the Grass pack are the same one, the same guy. Apologies if you're not, but both packs are great, as well as the Ultra Dynamic Sky. Like I said, great customizable features and parameters. So thanks to everyone who submit stuff to the marketplace and makes the community that much better. So what we're looking at here, whoa, super fast camera. Let me turn that down.
Yeah, and I apologize if the mouse scroll wheel also acts up on you. We're ready to get a new mouse.
I was getting ready to say, I scroll it down and then it kind of moves up on me on its own.
Yeah, it was doing that to Ryan Brooks, then it did me, and then I think it's time for a new mouse.
Yeah, that's okay. I got this. So what we're looking at here is I just dragged in. Now, these aren't painted foliage instances. This is just to show you an example of the lighting mode and the difference between the two. This is the SM Bush from the starter content, which you can add by going to Add New, Feature Content Pack, and then Content Pack Starter Content. So I drag that in here, and I have a directional light kind of going towards us, so you can kind of see what the foliage looks like. Now, from the front where it's hitting, they sort of look the same. You know, you can't really tell a difference, and that's great. But once you get around to the back, and I have these camera shortcuts set up, once you get around to the back, you can really see how, and it's particularly with trees and bushes, you know, light will penetrate leaves. Light, you know, leaves are translucent for the most part, unless you have a really thick, waxy leaf. But even then, light will go through. So what this shader model, or this technique does is allow you to not only open up the subsurface color input, which allows you to kind of give it a little, this nice little color variance, but it also opens up the opacity input, which also allows you to control sort of like the backlighting on it. And I'll show you guys how that's working here. So for this, I do have I've basically instanced this material. If I can resize this, let's just, okay, let's go this way. Let's try that. There we go. All right, cool. So here's the subsurface color, and I'll mess around with the parameters really quickly, and then I'll go. So we have, essentially, let's unselect it here. There we go. So as you can see, I can control the color a lot easier. And
throw it in a hot pink. Go on. You know you want
to. All right.
You know you want to.
Let's put in a pink color here.
There you go. There we go.
There we
wow,
go.
that really affects.
Yeah, now we have
really affects
the red
color.
bush. So, and it's pink, rosacea.
Yeah, it's very rosy. It's
Yeah.
Valentine's
Yeah.
Day.
Oh,
it's perfect.
That's beautiful.
There we go.
Yeah, I'll just leave it there. I'll just leave it there for you, Alex. So basically what you do is, here, I'll show you the difference between the two as well. I'm going to open up both of these alongside one another, wherever that just went to. Okay, oh, there we go. Bush, okay. So this is the original, and as you can see, it's very simple. This is the starter content bush material. So it literally drives an opacity mask. You have your base color. You're not messing anything with the roughness or really the normal. You just plug it in and go, right? So this one's a little bit different. I modified it. I kind of parameterized some of the inputs here. And essentially, I drive the subsurface color from the base by just a multiplication. And this per instance fade amount we'll get into later, but this basically allows you to control when you start to paint clusters of foliage and you start to set up cull distances, which culling refers to just the removal of instances based on distance. So you're culling these foliage instances out, and what per instance fade amount does is let you control the amount of per instance that's culled within each cluster.
Yeah.
So I'm going to apply that, and I'll show you guys this in action. I might have to modify this material really quickly. And because I'm using the same, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go multiply, and since I know it works for both of, because I was doing a little test earlier, and it's going to mess with the clipping value, but that's not what I'm worried about now. I can control that later, but I'm just doing this just for sake of speed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply that by that, and then I'm going to multiply it by a single constant. And you guys will see how that when I do this, I can actually control the culling distances. So let's just call this per instance fade. And I'm going to give it a default value of 1. And as a heads up, for this project, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, isn't Hobson coming on to do a dynamic lighting? Is he gonna do?
I wouldn't, no, I just talked to him at lunch actually about this. He, so after Tim Hobson came on and did his lighting guide, he actually wants to come on and do another guide that's much more about, like you said, dynamic lights. And also he's taking a lot of requests on Twitter. So if you look up, I think if you just type in like UE4 Tim Hobson or something, he should pop up. You should see, little dude with an orange beard, and send him a tweet if you want to see something in particular also. But he's got some more stuff coming.
So to segue into what you're talking about, basically these scenes are using fully dynamic lighting. And the reason I did that is because there's a whole nother slew of stationary and skylight using distance fields and cascaded shadow maps to transition from static shadows to dynamic shadows. That's a whole nother stream that would take forever to go over. So I'm using dynamic lighting for everything you'll see today, and it's not super optimized by any means, but it has high frame rate. It's running just fine, and for sake of build time, so I'm not constantly rebuilding. So what I've done here is, as you saw earlier, I've essentially tied the per instance fade amount with a multiply of the opacity mask. And what you can see here is that I've actually set up some cull distances within, so I'm going to go into Foliage, which is Shift 4. We went over last stream the shortcuts. So you can press Shift 3, which is landscape, Shift 4 is foliage. And within each foliage mesh, so this is your foliage tool, which we'll go into further in a second, you essentially just grab, so what I'll do is I'll set up a little filter here real quick, static mesh. I'm going to select content. So you can grab any sort of static mesh, and when you drag it, click and drag, when this goes yellow, it means you're about to add it. I'm actually going to remove that. So I've painted some foliage instances here, and I set up some cull distances very close to the camera. So it's right here, instance settings, mobility, it's still static, but I've made it so it culls, oh man, this mouse scroll wheel.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. So 4,000 is essentially, which isn't that far, and as you can see, it's culling out. And this is how you help with performance, but check this out. So I have it culled about halfway. Now we're going to take our little red roses here, and we are going to mess with that per instance fade amount. And as you can see, I'm actually controlling the amount of instances that are faded at those distances. So it's a really cool way to help, like, you know, gauge the flow of transitioning. You know, let's say if you have a big open world and you really don't need, you got a wall or a big rock and you really don't need some of those instances being rendered. Naturally, they'll be cold due to visibility, but you know, there are ways to control those distances a little bit better.
Yeah, and you've parameterized that, right? So it can be altered at runtime.
Exactly.
And so this is like if you're in your options and settings, you know that they don't have particularly high specs on their PC, so you can let them set, you know, the foliage distance like you would in mini games like Skyrim, for example. Anything open world, you've probably seen that slider in it for foliage culling distance.
Yep.
So that's how you
and
set that
actually
up.
onto that same, here, I'm going to set this to 10,000. I think that's 10,000. So these are fully, and this actually segues right into what you were talking about, Alex. So we actually added I think it was in 4.13, density scaling for foliage. Now there is, I've opened up this.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, I got you.
Hot monitors over here.
I got you.
There you go.
So this is the just the foliage instance mesh, you know, documentation. It's pretty straightforward. It gives you all the, you know, all the info that I'm kind of going to go over and tell you about today. I highly suggest for anyone who's ever starting out, open up the documentation and just read through it. Not only will you probably learn some new information, more than likely, especially if you're new, but even if you're still old school, I still learn new stuff when I'm reading through because it's always being updated and changed. So we're looking for density scaling. There's culling, there's the vertex lighting, foliage scalability. This is what we're looking for. So this was added back, I think in 4.13. And what it does is it allows you, much like you were talking about in Skyrim, Alex, it allows you to paint foliage fairly densely, and then based on the user's platform or, you know, performance requirements, you can set the scalability, the density of the foliage using the engine scalability settings, which then can be added to an INI config file, which you can load into a iOS project, so it's dialed back. Or you can just expose it as a slider in UMG and have that, you know, like an option. So what I'm going to do, and the important thing to note here is that, so here's what I'll do. I have this checked to account for foliage. I'm going to set it to low. And you notice when I do that, it's not having an effect. That's because it doesn't work unless you're playing. You have to be playing. So even game mode won't work. Pressing G to toggle game mode. So as soon as I press play, however, it's on low. So there's no foliage. However, if I set it to high, or medium rather, now we have a small amount of foliage, and then you can
Kinda peppered
continually.
in.
Exactly. A nice word, pepper.
And then you go all the way up to, like
now we have epic, and
then
it should
it's
look
everything.
identical to that. Boom.
And when you kick it up with cinematic, it just throws in a ton of extra ones that
yeah,
you
I
didn't
think
put in.
I think
No,
cinematic
don't-
would has.
I think it's just like a rendering
Yeah, I
option
think
there.
it's
not
actually
gonna
just for
actually,
it's not gonna do.
So once you
anything.
hit epic quality, you're good.
Yeah, that's the cap. I think what cinematic does though is it unlocks the texture resolution and the mipping. So there is no mipping or streaming. It's just full res textures. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's accurate. Cool, so that is just the very basic intro to just single foliage instances. Now we're going to talk about essentially there's 3 different ways to apply foliage to your scene. There is the traditional, what we're looking at, the painted foliage where you have a little bit more control over what you're doing. Then you have the landscape grass output, which is using the material to paint your layers, and then on those layers you'll have assigned meshes that sample those layers and go, okay, there's grass here at X amount of weight. I'm going to put this amount of foliage that you've already told me. And then there's the procedural foliage volume. Now, I actually just entered a bug today that I've been working on over the week, last week with a user. The procedural foliage volume does have a performance issue in 414, so I made sure to scale it down a little bit, just so we're not populating like the entire landscape mountains example. We don't want to be...
Yeah, that's a huge, huge area.
We're keeping it a little condensed, but with that said, I'm going to jump right into... let's start with the painted foliage since we're kind of there already. And I have these pre-made scenes, and I think each one of them has a different little time of day to show you guys. But essentially, so what I've done is I've also set up some cameras. So as you can see, with traditional foliage, you can get a little bit more control over where you paint and apply certain foliage instances. So here you can see I have some clovers and some grass instances, and trees clumped together in certain areas. I've made sure I have like a little road with some mud, little pathway, and this is great because of the way that you're allowed to control each instance. So, and what I mean by that is I've added all my foliage instances here, and I'm going to run you guys through some tricks here. So let's say that let's just do that. So let's say you want to erase all the foliage in an area. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. You can select all of these instances. So right now, the only active one you'll be working with is the one that's checked. So make sure that you go into here, and any one that you don't want to be affected in the scene, you check or uncheck. So a quick way, this might be new for you. I don't know why I never thought of this.
Back in the
Yeah,
day.
well, watch this. So I click the first one, and this is a general computer knowledge anyway, but shift-click the last one, right?
Yeah.
And it'll select all of them. Then do that with the checkboxes. Boom. Now they're all selected.
I need the general computer knowledges course for like my family.
Yeah.
Like, a lot
Oh,
of people I
gosh.
know could probably
Me
use it.
too.
Yes, if you shift and click or control and click, you can get more things.
Control A will blow people's mind if they've never seen the select all.
Select all button.
Yeah, it's Alt F4. There's
Oh,
a good
don't you
one.
even
But
get me
don't try
started.
that, you guys. Don't try that. So as you can see, I've selected all the foliage instances, and now I can erase them. And this is one way to do it. There's also another tool that shout out to the gentleman who wanted me to mention this in the last stream. I didn't get to it just because it wasn't really a foliage. It wasn't a landscape tool. It was more a foliage thing. So what I'm going to do is use the lasso tool, and now anything encompassed within that brush that I lasso and anything selected is now going to get selected when I cruise around. Another cool thing to note is that your brush size by the slider max default is 8192. Yeah, so 8K. That's not the max. You can set 12.5 if you want. 12,000. It's massive, but that's okay. You don't feel restricted by this. However, I say that, and I give you a strong warning that if you are working with a large number a large number of instances. And let's say that you go to, and for the most part, what you want to do is test out to get the scale and how everything will look together when you do a single click and paint those instances. Don't have a huge brush size and expect to click and drag and for it to just work magically perfectly, because the more instances you have, the more it needs to populate and account for it. It does line traces to detect collision. It has to detect the layers. It does all of this stuff instantly when you're clicking. So, I try and do, when I work, I work on things like grass first. I do all the grasses, and then I'll move to like rubble, so I'll do like rocks, and then I'll go to trees, and I'll make sure trees are painted together.
Sort of adding them one at a time, layering them up from smallest to largest.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. So yeah, that's how I go about it. So what we'll do is I'll step you through these tools really quickly. So
I just realized that Bob Ross is actually probably really applicable here, because it's like, yeah, you start with the base layer of green with the grass, and then you start adding in the trees later. And then,
that's exactly. I mean, that's how you would work with almost any landscape. I mean, you can't really define the trees until you have your grass laid out and you know where those trees can grow, and that moves into the procedural foliage, which we'll talk about in a second.
Nice.
So let's say I have, for sake of what I'm going to do is so you guys know the paint tool. Paint tool is pretty straightforward. I'm painting a dense amount of grass here, as you can see, which I don't highly recommend. Just don't go crazy with the grass tool and just start painting. You keep in mind that it all has a performance effect. Even if it is hardware instanced meshes, it's still going to affect performance, especially if you have a really complex shader. So as you can see, I've painted a nice little area of dense foliage, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to reapply, and reapply essentially lets you adjust the instance settings for each one of these. So I'm going to click on both of these that I've painted. I've actually painted that one too. Yeah, those are gone. So I'm in the reapply tool, and I'm going to go to density adjustment, and this allows me to basically, as it suggests, affect the density per click, and this is based on a 1-to-1 ratio. So if I was going to, right now we've got X amount of foliage. If I set it to 0.5, it's going to half all of that. So it's a percentage.
Speaking of all the things that you're adding in the scene and how it affects the scene, do you want to throw up the stats? Bloody Bobby was asking for a data readout.
Yeah, of course.
Your performance. And if you watch the previous stream, we do talk quite a bit about how to get these stats up.
Yeah, so basically what I did was stat, unit, no space after unit, and graph.
That's right.
And it'll pop up a little graph here. And as you can see, you've got your GPU draw game in your frame. So I'm actually going to get the graph out of the way real quick, but I'll keep up the other one's graph just so I can, so it's still up here. So what I'm going to do is I have these selected, and I'm going to, now that I have the density adjustment, and I can even affect the scaling if I wanted to. So let's go to uniform scaling, and you always want to scale things uniformly when you're working with foliage, mostly because when you start working with large scenes and using like distance fields, mesh distance fields don't look well or work well with non-uniformly scaled meshes. So you have to make sure that you scale uniformly, which is pretty easy to account for because the default, it's always uniform. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the scale, I'm going to set everything, let's do 1 to 2 now.
All right.
And it's going to be half the density. So I'm going to click here. So now everything in that area that I clicked is not only half as dense as it was, but it's now being set to the scale of 1 of min and max to 2.
Yep.
So now I could go around and click that everywhere.
So yeah, it's at the very least its own size, and then at most twice the size that it is.
Now this adds to, this is a really good way to help you control. I think that's the main word that I use when I talk about the differences of foliage application tools, is the amount of control you get from the foliage painting, mostly because it's been developed for the longest. So you have all of these settings that you're allowed to account for.
Yeah, controlling clumping and stuff like that really helps to add a natural effect to it, especially like in the previous stream that you did about landscapes in general. You showed off stuff about just like how to randomize your textures together, etc. And so when you create this kind of clumping on top of that, it really helps to add to that randomization effect. And then your players are a lot less likely to notice any kind of tiling effects anywhere, which I still to this day, you're going to find some tiling somewhere.
Always.
It's always going to be a thing. So.
Yeah, it's one of those things that is universally approached in every game engine. Every content you create, everything that you create, unless you're working in something like Substance or using what Ryan was working with, the procedural textures, it's always going to have a seam. There's always going to be tiling, and you're going to need to address that. So, watch my landscape stream. It was I showed you guys how to kind of break that up, and I do that in here as well. Excuse me, as well. So let's keep going through the foliage here. Now that so you guys saw the reapply, it's pretty straightforward, and that can work with anything, any mesh that you've pre-painted already. So now I'm going to do the select tool. Now there's a couple things I even learned last week about the select tool. So what I'm going to do is you can select all, which will obviously select all the foliage in your level. Now select invalid. Basically, a mesh, and I learned this, you'd be proud of me, Alex. I opened up some code.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Doug, shout out to Doug Wilson. He helped me out last week. I was looking at, I had a question, and they were like, well, what makes foliage invalid? And basically, the short answer is an invalid foliage is anything that is not intersecting, basically hasn't been painted on a surface. It might have been painted, but if I were to, watch this, let's just select a couple of these. Now I'm going to select these trees and duplicate them. Now that they're not touching a surface, select invalid. Oh, hold on. It might be because it's duplicated.
You have to actually add some.
Yeah, and I might need to get it out of here, or rebuild. Rebuilding might be like, hey, I see it now. So. Hopefully,
it might just be set to only build navigation, by the way.
Yeah, deselect all. What's up? What did you say?
Oh, when it built, I think it only built navigation.
No, that's what it looked like.
Oh, okay.
I have fully dynamic lighting.
Oh. Okay. Oh, yeah. You know what? That was just me.
Select invalid. So for some reason, it's selecting these. Maybe because they're not touching. Let's put them in the ground.
And it might actually be floating ever so slightly.
Yeah, select them out. All right. Well, so ignore what you're seeing here.
Ignore when this doesn't work the way I say it did.
But the gist of the invalid is that it's not on a surface, and you select it, and it should be selecting any foliage instance meshes that are essentially not valid. Which I don't use that often, because if I see something floating, I'll just remove it or delete it myself. We went over the lasso tool, but I'll show you guys. You have your filters here. You can filter for static meshes, BSPs, landscapes, and foliage, and translucent. So I can just go boop. And now see I have these on. These are unchecked. And using the lasso tool, it's not grabbing those trees. So the lasso tool, I would almost say, is I like is more effective than the select tool. Select is if you're doing single instance changes and you want to kind of tilt something. And the fill tool is really straightforward too. You basically grab it's exactly what you think. It just fills the area using the instance mesh settings that you have applied, and it'll just fill that area and that layer. So with that is the traditional sort of foliage painting approach. Now I'm going to get into, which I think is the more meat and potatoes of what I use when I do my projects. And it gives me, not only does it give me good control, but I really like the way that I can scale the density and see those changes in effect without having to kind of repaint everything. So we'll save that. And I'm going to go ahead and open that level.
Is it called meat and potatoes level?
I wish.
Guess what phrase they latched onto? It was meat and potatoes.
I knew it. I knew it. Any sort of catchphrase.
That's it.
Yeah.
We haven't said Chad yet.
Yeah, I was going to say, as long as Chad is...
as long as Chad's happy.
It's okay. That was great.
Someone who hasn't seen the first stream is going to be like,
Yeah,
what are
they'd be
they
like, I'm
talking
lost, I'm
about?"
lost. It's okay. So this is another scene that I set up. I tried to keep, so yeah, shout out to the Ultra Dynamics guy. It looks great. It's got a bunch of little parameters. The grass, all these meshes, the grass mesh, and the trees are from the Realistic Trees and Grass Pack, so thank you guys.
It's like, a few bucks, you two could have this.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it's
That looks.
I know, it makes me feel
sweet.
like I'm a veteran game dev
Yeah.
guy, but when in reality I'm intermediate. I'm pretty good, but this is good looking stuff. So yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. And it helps educate people on some quality, sets the quality bar. So.
Wow. Yeah, no, it looks great. It looks like what a lot of open world games attempt to achieve in quality there.
I put the third person in there for scale, so people could kind of run around. And I did mess with some of the parameters on each foliage. I moved around grass. I tried to bring it to life a little bit, so it was interesting to look at. But as you can see, here we go, stat unit graph. This is a fully dynamically lit scene, and it's really not that bad. Obviously, I could scale things back, and I could start culling. But see, the cull distances, I'm even way off in the distance. I could cull it in half and still see that grass on that hill over there, and then get back a bunch of performance. The focus of this wasn't a performant thing. It was a application, and then learning how to deal with performance. But
at this point, like if you want to get better performance, you can do what he showed you with culling distances. You can do a lot of that stuff. But if you want to see like what the full shebang looks like without any of that, wow, that's what it looks like.
Yeah. So and all of these meshes and stuff, I made sure to kind of look at the scale, because the default scale, some of them are really small. The grass was just too tiny. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to that stuff. But what really makes this easy and this approach fun, and we're going to get into it. I'm just going to open up this material. So here's the cool thing. You guys can remake this. And what I'll do, Alex. It's
only the one me.
What I'll do, Alex, is share this material shader, because this is actually the ground.
You made that one?
I modified it. I can't say I
but
made it.
This is one
this
that
is from starter content.
Okay, cool.
That I've just added and modified a little bit. You'll just have to replace some textures, which I can even parameterize. But this is just the ground grass, and I've created landscape layers with it. And because it uses the macro and micro tiling variation, it breaks up that tiling already, so I don't have to worry about setting that up in front of you guys. Neither do you. But everything you're looking at, might be a little confusing. All you're really focused on is this little area right here. This is it.
This is actually going to answer a question we got.
Yay.
This is one of the earliest questions we got, and I'm just going to throw it out here right now. And it is straight up Raildex. What is this? And a picture of the grass node.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good question, Raildex.
Yeah, I will answer that right now. So basically, this is the landscape grass approach to applying foliage to your surface. So the way it works is you have to have established landscape layers. And those landscape layers, what happens is they get sampled. You sample these layers by using, as you can see, it says sample grass. Now here I have my layer grass layer, and obviously that's my grass layer. So now everywhere I paint grass, let's not go too far into it. I don't want to confuse you yet. So I'm sampling grass, right? And now I have this output node where I plug in and create these different grass types. Now these grass types, you can make different ones and plug them in to sample the same layer. So you can divide it up to be, as you can see, let's see, grasses. So I have this grasses grass type. Here, 1 second. So what I've done is I've gone into here. If you can go in here, I opened up my I just made a default grass type. So all you have to do is go to add, and you name the whatever you want it to be. I named this one grasses. So, and then you can either create a new type or you can choose from a pre-existing one. I'm going to delete you. So this is the grasses type. And what this does is it allows you to add instance, basically static meshes, which will become instance, and applied to that landscape layer. So what I have here, and they each have their own, much like the Foliage paint tool, they each have their own respective settings. So what you can see here is I have my grass 01, which is at about 15. And what I'm going to do to show you guys how awesome this is and how quickly it can really change your scene. So right now, I think that's grass 01 and grass 07. Those are my main grasses. Now, if I go, and I have the cull distances set up to 50,000, which is pretty far off, but you know, if you're working with a large level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to 1. And as you can see already, immediately I have less grass and I get back performance. And you know, it doesn't look as good, but it's not awful. And that's the interesting thing about this, is that you can really start to understand how much foliage you actually need, because it's so easy to go overboard. You just, like I was saying, you do the paint click and boom, there's tons of foliage. Oh great, grass is filling everywhere, I'm done. But in reality, you are probably have a lot of overdraw, a lot of shader complexity overdraw, and you don't need that. And just by simply changing the scale of some.
Do you want to? Oh, now that you say it, you want to go into shader complexity?
Oh
view and take a look around?
Yeah, I can totally.
Here, actually, that's the thing, we have lots of different view modes for seeing
let's go to 25 and really crank up the. Now I have just a lot of grass. I can't even see the ground at this point, essentially, and my performance took a little hit. So shader complexity.
There you go. So
this is what you really don't want.
Whoa, that's bad.
Yeah, so white is essentially too much overdraw. Now, the fact that we are the only thing that's white essentially here is the grass
It's
alone.
all that small grass that's clearly just lots of overdraw, lots of clustering.
Exactly. So the fact
but
that
the trees are okay, and it looks like the sky is really dense.
Yeah, that's the sky. The shader that he uses on the sky is pretty intense, but it's still, you know, it's not that bad. It's closer to in here.
Yeah.
You know that it's when you get into the hot pink and the white. And the white is not good. So immediately what I can do is, where did you go? Landscape grass. There you are.
And the grass is translucent, not masked, right?
Yes, the grass is. I believe it's actually. You know what? Let me look at that, because this is his that he set up, and I've only messed with the parameters. I believe it is two-sided foliage. I believe he's using it, and he's used a master.
Just look at the details of it. We don't want to show too much of that.
Okay.
Just look at the details right there. There you go. Masked. It's masked.
Okay,
you can get out of that.
Thank you.
We just want to see if it was that or the other.
Cool. Yeah, you can do both.
Yep.
So let's bring back you.
Valentine's Day powered by overdraw. Yeah, you're right. It did make it like a nice, pretty pink Valentine's Day scene. It's just good notice there, Valkyria.
Wow, we're just hitting the theme today. All right, so now what I'm going to do is, since we've seen the overdraw, I'm going to bring this back to what it was. Let's go to 10. And see, there's still pink and white, which isn't great, but it's not killing me at this point. And I can continue to mess with that, and I can lower the quality. But in all honesty, this is doing okay for what we're looking at here. It's okay. So now we can look at, so that sampled the grass. So let me show you this in action really quickly. So I've got my layer set up that we went over last stream. What I'm going to do is paint the grass here. Whoa, don't be doing all that.
Oh, there you go.
All right, so when I paint this grass, it's going to populate grass where that layer is. Boom.
Yep.
So if I unpaint it, it disappears. So this actually, much like the other approach, this actually still gives you, as long as you have your settings, your grass types, and your set up correctly, you can just start worrying about painting at that point. And it's awesome how it works. I love, like, in one of my projects, I was doing a river, and I was really having a hard time getting the grass to sort of cut off where the river and the mud start, and like having it look nice and sharp. And this approach really helped me do that, because I made sure that that layer that was using the mud, there was no grass on it. It was like rocks and pebbles, and it was a hard cut from that layer immediately to the grass. And then if you look on the sides of rivers and stuff, it's just grass, and then it cuts off into soil and like wet sand.
Yep.
So this will help you do that as well.
Yep.
So yeah, the landscape grass output is very, very effective. There are a couple caveats to this, which I will point out as well. Let me get out of the paint mode here. So in these settings, man, this keeps. Come back over here. There we go. So you have your scale. You can modify scale. This was one that was added once you start using basically using light maps for foliage. There was an issue that a licensee had where he would have a really dense amount of foliage per component. And what was happening is there was almost a color variation between the components, and it was like a really dense green, and it was sort of like a faded green, and then the next component was like a brighter, and it didn't look right. And what that was is it's sampling the landscape's light map to get some of that indirect color information. So it was incorrect color. So we've actually added a checkbox, use landscape light map. So if you start to see that issue where you're like, well, this stuff isn't looking right, I'm using baked lighting, and the color, for some reason, indirect lighting isn't right, try using the landscape light map checkbox.
Right. It's always awesome when it's just a checkbox, and then maybe that'll fix it right there.
Yeah, makes it really simple. Thank you, Jack Porter.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. And that's another thing. If you have a chance to look through our YouTube archives, Jack Porter has actually come on and talked quite a bit about landscape stuff, and even answered stuff about like runtime landscape modification, caves, etc. We get those questions a lot. Yeah. So definitely check that one out.
Yeah. Oh, you're good. Thank you. So there are settings here that aren't exposed, or there are settings in the foliage mesh, the traditional foliage painting, that aren't exposed here, and that's simply because this is sort of a newer tool. Those things haven't been fleshed out yet. I'm going to start looking at entering a feature request for some of these, but you can use a great one that is exposed is the lighting channels, and lighting channels really help you control especially like a night lighting situation. We not only have the scenarios now, which allow you to switch between a night and a day lighting scenario for baked lighting, but you can actually use light channels to have maybe a nighttime where you want your trees to be like illuminated by the moonlight, and then the grass not so much. You can put the grass on a completely different light channel. So the one that isn't exposed here that can affect the way you work is the effect distance field lighting, and that can also be controlled in the static mesh setting. So if I open this here, and typically you don't want to use distance field for things like grass. You can use them for trees, but essentially often the distance, what will happen is, especially when it gets to billboards, the ray trace distance fields, the accuracy is harder to get. So you can use things like distance field ambient occlusion, modify the cascaded shadow maps settings, which I'm sure Hobson will go over, and then the ray trace distance field soft shadow settings. This for me is cool because I can paint the landscape at the same time I'm applying foliage, which is great. It's a really cool concept. It's almost cutting my work in half, as long as I make sure that those, and what you can do is, and what I like to do is start off with like an empty, let's just scare you guys here. Oh, I'm going to clear layer. Oh no, it's all gone. It's all gone. So what I like to do is run a test. So sorry for the darkness here, but do maybe a single click. Oh, look at that. I might need to fix that. The tree. That's cool. Yeah, it's okay. It's just a little windy. And you kind of get a gauge. Wow, that's awesome. You kind of get a gauge at like what it'll look like once you start to paint around. And as you can see, with every time I paint, it populates and trees are there and whatnot.
Oh, look, the world it's done for you.
Look at that.
How neat.
You like that?
What in the?
It's the wind effect, the world position
Were you
offset.
messing with that?
It's pushing it too much. Well, I was last night. I don't remember it looking like that, but
Somebody went and messed with parameters.
that's a little too extreme. That's like Outer Banks hurricane.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no,
Um,
I've seen that in North Carolina before.
Oh, it's a real
hurricane
thing.
comes in, everything's sideways.
So so this is the landscape grass approach, and I like this approach. I kind of I do a combination of the two. I use the landscape grass as well as the hand painted foliage, and using those two combined can really give you some convincing foliage effects. So now we're going to move on to the always popular, but I don't know if it's used as much, just because it's still not super new, but somewhat new. The procedural foliage volume. Now, what I've done is I basically isolated a little area, and I'll select it with the foliage volume. So all you need to do for this to work out of the box, let's say you started a brand new project, and you want to use the procedural foliage. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to Edit, Editor Preferences, and then you're going, no, that's on the wrong screen. And then you're going to go to Experimental. And as I mentioned, this is somewhat new, so it's still in its experimental phase, but it still works. So I'm going to enable it. And I don't need to restart my project. Usually if you do, it'll prompt you to do so. So now what you do is you go into the content browser, and now that you've enabled the procedural foliage volume, you can go to Add New, and I believe it's under Miscellaneous. Actually, you know what? You don't even have to go through here because it's not through there.
Wait, what's it called again?
Procedural foliage volume, and there's a
right,
foliage blocking volume as well, which
That's
allows you to block it.
Probably, yeah. what you wanna grab.
Procedural, and there it is.
Yep.
Magic. Okay, so you have actually a blocking volume, which allows you to kind of, it does exactly what you think. It blocks the procedural foliage from being generated in that area.
Yeah.
But you basically just drag it in there. What I've done here is I've dragged a procedural foliage volume, and you have these settings. Go into the details, and I'm going to hide the tags, activation. I wish these were not auto-expanded. There we go. Okay, and you have these settings here. And what you want to make sure is that this volume is encompassing the landscape. It doesn't need to be that tall, but I'm just making sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go into here. So if you haven't done this already, it's going to prompt you. You're going to have to make a new foliage spawner. And you can have a bunch of different spawners. And what that spawner does is it allows you to add...
How do you make one of these also?
the
spawner.
Spawner.
Yeah.
So once you drag in a new volume, you'll go to procedural foliage, and this will be blank. So this will be empty, right? And you'll have to make a new one.
Okay.
Or
I see what you mean.
You can use your pre-made one. In this case, I've made my new one.
Just want to make sure that we had that one covered.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And here are the settings for the new one. Now this one is very interesting, and the procedural foliage stuff is. It's going to take a little bit more time to get it initially set up because you're going to have to mess around with things like, let's see. So what you'll do is to go further, it'll ask you for foliage types, and you'll add a new foliage type just like anything else when you add an element, press the plus sign. And much like the spawner, if you don't have a foliage type created already, you're going to have to make one. And what you're going to do is, as you can see here, I have my different foliage types. I named them for sake of sanity, FT underscore whatever it is, so foliage type. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open grass, right? This is my foliage type grass for the procedural spawner. And these are all the settings for it. Now, before I get into this too far, we do have documentation and a quick start on this. And this is really helpful just for the simple fact that what I'm going through is the same stuff, but they go into a bit more detail, and it's a very step-by-step approach. So keep that in mind. And my outline that I'll share with you guys has a link to that as well, so you'll be ready to go for that. so as you can see here, this setting is exposed, the effect distance field lighting. That's what I was telling you about that isn't used in the landscape grass. But so there are settings like the collision, the clustering, and the growth. Now, all of these, I'm not going to go into all of these, but every single one of these has a thumbnail and a tooltip, not a thumbnail, a tooltip with information on what the setting does, like most settings in the engine. And every single one, for example, if you really want to affect the amount, the intensity, or the density, you use number of steps in initial seed density. And what that does is, it gives you a more dense output. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, and what you'll notice is that if I were to drag this over, that foliage is not going to stay there. Everything is contained within that blueprint. But what I've made sure to do is down, let's see. Yeah, it's down here.
There's so many controls in
Yeah,
here in
there's a
general.
lot
I'm just
of-
I just realized, I don't remember scale curve. Like, that one's actually
Yeah,
new
that
for
one's
me.
really cool. Okay, so I've made it so this grass is only applied on the grass layer.
Yeah.
So now when I go to procedurally generate this foliage, where I have that road painted, it will not generate that grass on top of that.
Awesome.
Boom. I press re-simulate, and it re-simulated what that area should look like procedurally. And notice all my grasses that are tied to the grass are there, and then they give a nice little halt once it moves to the mud layer. And I've added some little clovers. Too bad it's not St. Patty's Day yet, right?
Yeah, that'd be perfect for it.
Great. But yeah, so this is similarly. So now I have trees, and the trees have the exact same settings.
Goodness.
And it allows you to, you can do things like, the really cool stuff is once you start tying this procedural content in with having them actually grow, having them grow over time. So there's things like can grow in the shade. So that means like, let's say I've populated an area with trees, and I have a set range of an age of trees. They'll each have a seed eventually. Once they reach a certain age, they'll seed out a little sapling, essentially. And that will grow as well up to the max scale that you set it. And if it's marked with can grow in shade, then it will actually grow in shade. But if it can't, then if you're using not a time of day system, but you're still trying to simulate growth, it will not grow in that shade. So this is a really cool tool. It's a little different than the landscape grass output and the traditional foliage in the way that it interacts with the rest of the engine and how you can control it.
Yeah, I don't know. Wow, I didn't even know that's how powerful it was.
Yeah, that's
incredible.
It's a different tool. And the more I think about it, Alex, that guy who was showing us the landscape,
Spike.
I don't know. Yeah, that was something I clicked.
Yeah, the guy showing us the landscape.
The guy who was doing when we looked earlier in the stream, the procedural who was eating it like the Minecrafty landscape guy.
Ali Akbar is the one that's on the launcher right now,
the
because
launcher
it's actually a spotlight right now.
Yeah.
Is the landscape architect.
And I have a
he at
feeling he's
runtime has a tessellated landscape that he's like molding and deforming, and it's
Lewis,
really-
I think Lewis would get a kick out of the way he makes caves, and it's interesting that there's a big no that you don't make caves with landscapes, but somehow this guy has pulled it off. So kudos to him. But the procedural approach is really cool in that it allows you to control things like growth and areas in which they're propagated and controlled. So.
That's incredible, though. The I didn't even know we had something in the engine like that. I'm supposed to be on top of these things. That you can actually control when it's going to grow, and then if it grows in shade.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
People I get questions on occasion, just because the procedural foliage isn't used as much, but about how to manage and handle these things. And I'm still learning about the procedural foliage stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the gist of at least the applying foliage to your scene and
painting it in there.
Yeah, painting
and
it
painting
in
the
and
material
those
on
things.
to control it too.
How much time we got? Because
we got 5, and we got a ton of questions.
Oh,
We're
geez.
probably gonna have to throw some of these onto.
Oh man, did I talk that long?
Dude, that was great though. This is really awesome.
Right.
So
I'm not parched.
let's see here. Okay, first I want to answer this one really quick because I've seen him. Jin Wake Up asked, why is the shader complexity so crazy on this one versus the last stream? This isn't the same level. This is a totally different stuff in here. It is way more dense than the last stream. We were using much more bare bones project.
Yeah, I don't even think we were using. I think we maybe put in one foliage mesh in that last. So yeah, this isn't even the same thing.
Yep. Let's see here. All right. So I'm going to get to the top of these questions. We have so many here. Let's see. I'm going to start at the bottom, actually.
Yeah, start where you need to.
Okay. So is the procedural feature runtime at all? C. Praxis asks.
I believe you can expose it at runtime. And because it is. It's in a way temporary. So like I was saying, if I were to move this, and if I were to move and then resimulate, it's not going to maintain that area here. So in short, I actually don't know off the top of my head if you can do this runtimeable, because I think how it's supposed to go is you set your procedural volume, you simulate, you bake that out, and then you leave it. And that's what you do. But I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure you could expose this at runtime, because it doesn't seem like it's doing anything that would be against, because the landscape grass actually populates when you load the level. So it's still doing handling a similar effect.
So there's a capability of, you're going to have to dive into code a
yeah,
little bit to make
you might
work,
have to do that. Yeah.
But actually, if you do let us know too, because I'd love to see how that looks when you.
Yeah,
get
that'd
done.
be cool.
Let me see.
It wouldn't be too hard.
Okay, so Zippo 3361 was asking about having something in the game that will control foliage generation. So instead of you drawing it yourself, can you have some sort of actor that draws foliage randomly every time you run the level? And so I guess that kind of falls into the same thing.
Yeah,
you'd have
sort
to
of
take
the same. Yeah, you'd have to take that out. That'd be more of at a runtime thing, and that is cool. It's definitely doable. Yeah. First and foremost, it is doable. Do I know how to do it? No, but
not off the top of my head, no.
Yeah, off the top of my head, no. But
No,
I don't think it would be that hard, especially from the stuff I've seen. Users being able to. This guy made a standalone project. It was similar to what Ali Akbar had, but he was actually, you're able to modify the landscape height map, and then it would generate foliage based on wherever that is located, and based on heights and weights and stuff like that. So it is possible.
Cool. Yeah, he definitely is some sort of a proof that you can get in there and just do crazy stuff.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Yeah, just open your launcher and look at it. It looks awesome. And if you're watching this in archive, then go onto the forums and look up Landscape Architect.
Yeah.
Let's see. Next question. Vexerax asks, which is more efficient to use grass material node or paint grass models using the foliage tools on the render CPU/GPU wise?
Is he talking about? Are you talking?
I don't.
It sounds like landscape grass versus foliage.
Yeah.
Like just regular foliage.
Yeah.
And better to use depends on your situation. It depends on how you want to control applying foliage. How many people on your team? Like all these things come into account. But in all honesty, I would say use both. Use a little bit of both, because you can kind of quickly flesh out your level in sort of an alpha way, and have just foliage populated there, and then go in with the foliage paint tool and selectively remove or add, or
change the details.
Those little bit of extra things to crank up the.
Yeah, so you're probably going to end up using both. Do you know which one? Just like if you solely used one or the other, which one would be more performant though?
I would say the painted foliage, and only because you have more control.
Yeah. It's going to be more performant.
Yeah, the painted foliage, like your traditional hand paint, because you can control the density, the scale, the cull distance, all
Yeah,
of those things
that's a
per
good point.
instance.
Yeah.
Relative then, rather than just like doing the full on, I paint my landscape layer, grass here, it populates foliage. I go into that foliage setting and start messing around, being like, okay, it looks how I kind of want it to look.
Yeah, so I guess that does come down to it has more controls over how well you can make it performant, but it comes to you, the designer, as to how performant you're going to end up
Exactly.
making those details and the trade-offs you make for quality versus speed.
Exactly.
Let's see. Mustard Face asks, there is a way to change overall density, a way to adjust distance foliage is seen, but is there a way to change the density of the foliage based on distance from camera? And that's the distance.
Yeah,
culling
that's
from-
distance. That's honestly, that's distance culling.
Yeah.
So
That is camera based, to be clear. So that one.
yeah, culling is all based on what's on the screen and relative distance from player camera to that object or to that distance.
Let's see here. Let's see. Wow, we have quite a few questions here. I'm trying to
okay.
just knock out the ones
Is
that
it from
encompass. Yes, all Chad has so many questions. Let's see here. Is there a way to remove one instance of foliage out of everything? Can you just select one thing and hit delete?
So in the foliage tool, here I'll show them very quickly since I have that.
Yep.
The painted foliage. Yes. When it comes, but not for the landscape grass or the procedural foliage. So you can't select individual instances. If you were not in the, for example, who's the gentleman I'm addressing or lady?
Wait. Oh shoot, I lost it. I was looking for the next question.
It's okay. That's fine. Basically, if you are not in foliage mode and you try and select foliage, it's going to select all of it. And I went over this a little earlier. If you select, make sure they're checked. But if you want to select, say, one of these trees, these little maple trees here, I think it's a maple, something like that. Go into select mode, make sure it's checked, and now that it's selected, I can select this and go, you're gone. Right?
Yeah, or you could have adjusted its position.
Yeah,
in the
or
world.
move it, and this is what I was talking about, the tilt of it. Kind of modify the look and feel of it.
Yeah, like I could easily see like, oh, well, we put together this whole scene, but we want to make it look like everything got knocked this way in this one chunk, so everything can tilt over or something.
Exactly.
There. Cool.
Exactamundo.
Silly Walsh is asking, what is the best way to deal with foliage in VR, dynamic or static lighting, and all that?
So VR, that's a great. I love when I can answer VR questions. Stick with static if you can. Dynamic lighting in VR platforms, I won't say it is heavy, and the forward shader and MSAA and all that stuff that does help. Instant stereo rendering, like the mesh clipping that we do, all the optimizations, it's great, and it does. You can use dynamic lighting, but when it comes to foliage and you start wanting to really, like, let's say I wanted to make a VR Skyrim walkthrough, like. You're not going to have a fully dynamic scene in VR. You'd want to have, and this is what I didn't touch on, which hopefully Hobson will get into a little bit. It's basically transitioning from, and you can have dynamic lights, but make sure you use them wisely. Have your baked static shadows and all your light maps kind of in the further distance, so when you're away, you still see that they have shadowing and stuff. But as you approach to closer, those dynamic shadows can kind of fade in, and that realism stays kind of close vicinity to the player.
You're always going to have that point where as a developer you always see it, like there's like a line somewhere off in the distance where the shadow starts to come in, because that's just inevitability of games. But
LODs, all that.
You're going to have to again think about trade-offs, etc. when making those
a lot
decisions.
of the one thing I've really, and this is to sort of drive the point home about just foliage in general, is the one thing I've really learned is that you start smaller, a little bit smaller. Don't go crazy at first and overload your GPU and CPU and then start dialing it back. Do small iterations first and see what it looks like. And then if that's working for you, you can now multiply that by however many times you want, and then you're still going to have that performance because you've made sure that those LODs and everything are set up correctly first.
Okay.
What else we got?
Let's see here. Would it make sense to add billboards to distant grass, or would that be overkill? And you had mentioned using billboards for some things.
Yeah, you would use billboards for like trees and stuff, but for grass, at a point they just fades out. You know, if you look at the open world demo that we have, the kite demo, that's exactly what they do. It just fades out completely, and this is a big thing. I'm glad that this is segueing into this because a lot of people have problems blending their meshes with the underlying landscape, getting the colors right. So say your grass is green and the actual ground is sort of like a greenish brown. And there's sort of a disconnect there when you have the ground touching the bottom of the mesh, and it just doesn't look right. And people are like, well, how do I blend in between that? There is a distance field. Someone created a distance field blending, so you have a mesh and it has a distance field.
Yeah.
And you intersect it with your landscape. That distance field, he's basically exposed it so it has a range to where once it touches that landscape, it actually has like a light blend in areas where it overlaps. So it looks like it vertex painted almost.
Just right into it.
Yeah, like you layer it, you literally set a rock down into it, and it looks like it's kind of over, in a way, a parallax occlusion effect to where it looks like everything's kind of nicely placed around it and it's been buried, but it's cheaper. So there are ways to do that.
That actually answers two questions, because Mr. Barbarian's question was, how do I make the foliage look more grounded in the terrain? Because usually the trees pull dirt up around them, so that would actually create that effect.
Yep, and to help that, as you said, trees, you make a dirt layer, obviously custom paint your foliage or your landscape layer with dirt around the tree, but also, look at the color of your, here, let's see. So as you can see in this example, wherever my foliage instances are, so I have it, so it's sort of, this grass is darker, but you can't really tell that, it's more ambient occlusion at that point, but you can't really tell that it's not, the ground, where the ground starts and where the grass begins, and that's important. So try and match up the grass to the ground as best you can. And there's ways that this material does it by doing a far flat color blend. So that's a way that you can do that.
Yep. And I think Jeffy Jefferton in chat even said, like, just make them match. You can probably eyeball it.
Yeah, you can eyeball it. It's.
I think you can just.
Takes a little time, but you got it.
Yeah, there's also techniques and materials.
Yeah, there are techniques to do that as well.
Cool. So we're a little bit over. I'm going to do one more question, and then let's do that, and then we'll have to take the rest of your questions and put them up on the forums. Remember, if you go to the event section of the forums, there's stickies for our live streams and various posts for them. If you look up the post based on the name, which is whatever the title of this is, I thought it was below me, but we're in a different scene. You can look it up by that, and then throw your questions in there. We do come back and try to answer them later too. Handcore is asking, have you tried using the new velvet fabric shader on the landscape material to make moss and grass look fuzzy?
I have not. That's cool.
Yeah. Have you tried to do anything with like adding thickness to like moss and things like that?
Yeah. What I usually do, and this actually is kind of a tangent from what we were just talking about, but the vertex painting. What I'll do is, if I'm having a hard time blending in a rock that's going into the ground, I will take that texture that is surrounding the rock and paint it on the sides of that object where it meets the ground, so it blends. But I think Ryan Brooks made a really cool when they were doing Paragon and making the. I also have that pack on the someone on the marketplace made a blueprint splines that auto wraps around stuff.
Oh yeah,
really cool.
Very much like the Ryan Brooks one. Yeah.
He made Brooks has a moss shader that covers all the vines really well, and it looks great. And I'd look into that for the moss, but no. In short, I have not seen the velvet. It sounds cool. Sounds like it might be soft.
That one's actually new to me too.
Yeah.
But all right, cool. I see that we have a ton of questions still in here and more questions coming in. But I would really like to say, thank you all. Please come out to the forums and all that and ask your questions. We'd love to follow up with you. If you're watching this on a YouTube archive, then that means that the link is in the description. Please check that out and all that. Andrew, thank you so much. This was informative, welcome. Even for me, for everybody out there. A lot of people learned something. I learned a lot myself. I know that for a fact.
Good.
And 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 last thing before we let everybody go, tune in on Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We're gonna have yet another awesome stream, and I just got word back from the guys over at Funcom that if things go the way that they should, hopefully we'll have their community manager come on, and we should talk a little bit about Conan Exile's mod editor, which is now in the launcher. Check it out; it's awesome.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And next, don't forget. Like, subscribe, follow, do all those internet, social media type thingies that give us internet points. We like our internet points, and we like you to have information that as we provide it live. And if you actually catch wind of us on the next live stream, you can ask your questions live. So that's kind of awesome. So yeah, please make sure to sign up for all those. Oh, also we have
415 is coming out.
Oh, yeah, 415 is coming out soon.
Yeah,
you didn't hear it from us, but 415?
415
soon.
Happening
very soon. So just check us out on the live streams, and we'll see you all next time. Later.
Thanks, guys.